Evening, everybody, and welcome to the Town Board special meeting and work session for Tuesday, February 19th, 2019. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilwoman Shaw, Councilman Wiltshire,
Present.
Councilwoman Feldman, and Supervisor Levenberg. Here I am. Okay, so we are going to start off tonight with two public hearings. The first is the renewal of the 2019 Maya Riviera Cabaret license renewal. Is there anyone here to address the board on this issue? Okay, so seeing as we have had no objections, and the police and the building department have given their okay, unless my board colleagues have any questions or concerns, I would like to propose that we add a resolution to continue this cabaret license to our meeting next Tuesday, February 26th. May I have a resolution to close this public hearing? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Our second public hearing of the evening is in consideration of a sewer district extension for the property at 111 Hawks Avenue. As a reminder, the board's role is solely to give permission to the property owner to connect to our system. The expense of engineers, contractors, and other specialists are to be borne solely by the applicant. Is there anyone here to address the board? And hearing none, again, unless there is some cause for concern from the board, I would like to propose that we also add a resolution to approve this extension for our meeting next Tuesday, February 26th.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Do I need to get a vote on that? No, I'm just needing to now
Close the public hearing.
To close the public hearing. Great. So can I have a resolution to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Very much. Okay, so next up we have a few announcements. We have certainly been busy since we saw you all last. The town board meeting and work session scheduled for last Tuesday was canceled due to icy road conditions, and we held a short special meeting to pay our bills on Friday morning. Speaking of the weather, we are expecting some snow and ice again tomorrow, starting around 12 noon, and we are hearing 1 to 3 inches of snow tapering off into a wintry mix around 8 p.m. This seems to have been the current trend lately, just to make it very complicated for all of us. Please do check the Town of Ossining website and the town Facebook page for any weather-related delays or closures tomorrow or Thursday. Also last week, we welcomed back Town Clerk Marianne Roberts, who has been out on medical leave. We are very glad to have her back in action, and we want to thank her staff, along with interim town village clerk Victoria Caffarelli, for holding down the fort in her absence. And then on Saturday, I plunged into the mighty Hudson with a few dozen friends and neighbors to raise money for Galata House and other worthy community organizations. I am proud to say that at last count, the event raised over $11,000. Special thanks to Matthew Galata for organizing the event, and to Gareth Huffam from Hudson Valley Arts and Sciences, as well as our town parks department and everyone else who donated or helped out on the day of the event. I'm especially proud that a portion of the proceeds was dedicated to the Emergency Shelter Partnership, which provides a warm meal and a safe place to sleep for those individuals among us going without. As donations continue to trickle in, I'm sure I'll have more updates, but I am especially proud to be able to give a check this evening to Karen Dottori, who works with IFCA to help coordinate the emergency shelter program in Ossining. As soon as Karen gets here, I will present her with a check for the additional funds. Both yesterday and today, I, along with several of my board colleagues and members of the town staff, attended the Association of Towns annual meeting in Manhattan. This is a great opportunity for us to learn from the experts, as well as exchange ideas with our neighbors in municipalities from Long Island and Buffalo and everywhere in between. Over the next few weeks, we plan to have a conversation about all that we learned in our work sessions, in our workshops in a work session. But one major takeaway for all of us was that the potential elimination of AIM funding, or aid to municipalities funding to local governments, was cut from the governor's proposed budget. The town of Ossining receives roughly $152,000 annually, which offsets some of the spending in our general fund budget. And the governor's budget has proposed taking it away. That's problematic for several reasons, the least of which being that we budget on a calendar year and the state does not, which means we will have in good faith budgeted for a large revenue source that may not materialize. There's also the fact that this is one of our largest streams of non-property tax revenue, and any reduction will mean a property tax increase for our residents without any corresponding additional services or value. We are feeling squeezed from both sides. While the tax cap is good in theory and certainly has helped keep property taxes in check over these years, it forces us to get more creative every year, doing more with less. And if the state's going to continue to, at the same time, cut the very small stream of revenue that they provide to us, they are, in effect, forcing us to raise property taxes on the local level to make up for the loss. We have many advocates at the state level who are pushing for restoration of this funding. I think we have one in the audience tonight. Sandy Galiff, thank you. But so far, the compromise offered, which has been from the governor, would effectively be pitting us against our county to get our fair share of the proposed internet sales tax revenue. I'm hopeful that the folks fighting for us in Albany will help to bring this to a positive resolution and that our legislators will be there for us, but this is something that we will be watching very closely over the coming weeks. And Karen DeTore is just in, and I had the opportunity to mention that we've given some money to Emergency Shelter Partnership, but more has come in since, and I am proud to present you with a check to pass along to the Emergency Shelter Partnership for $570.
Levenberg for jumping in the river in freezing cold weather. And thank you, Makalata and Galata House, for making this event possible. Thank you very much.
Okay, so where was I up to? 2 weeks ago, we shared with everybody that the village's toilet replacement program would now be available to town residents. The Village of Ossining has invited the town to take part in a water-saving initiative that could help you buy a high-efficiency toilet with a $200 voucher. To see if your property is eligible, go to villageofossining.org, find the Departments tab, and click on Public Works to find more information on the TRP program. And we have had some interest, we're happy to say so far, and we hope that there will be continued interest because this was made possible from a grant, I believe, through the New York City DEP, I'm pretty sure. As part of their health and wellness series, the Ossining Public Library will be hosting Beverly Amanita Spencer for an hour of relaxation and sound healing on February 23rd at 11 a.m. Check out this ancient approach to health that is regaining popularity in the modern age. All you have to lose is a little stress. I want to remind everyone that the town board meeting next Tuesday, February 26th, will include a few important items that I want to highlight. We will be having a presentation on the progress of the McCarthy Drive restoration project, and for that, we will be joined by Town and Village Engineer Paul Fraioli of our Highway Department, as well as our consultants from Dolph Rotfeld, and Michael G. O'Connor from, did I already say that? Our Highway Superintendent, Michael G. O'Connor. Additionally, we'll be opening 3 very important public hearings on local laws 2, 3, and 4 of 2019, each of which will be calling for a referendum to eliminate one elected town position, including town highway superintendent, town clerk, and town receiver of taxes. We received a grant from the Department of State to get public input on some potential ideas for restructuring departments, some of which we used to hire a consultant who created an informational website about this potential project that we are calling Project Forward. We asked residents to take a look at some of the proposed ideas and fill out a short survey about what they thought. We sent postcards out to all the people in the town in general, and we also held 2 community conversations at the Ossining Public Library where we asked to hear from our residents about their impressions of the ideas that we presented. Calling for these public hearings is our next step to take if the community has any desire to go forward with these referenda, as there are certain time restrictions and deadlines at play. Conversation is not over. If you have thoughts on the proposals and have not yet had a chance to reach out, please email us at tc townofaustining.com with your thoughts or your questions. This is the first you're hearing of this. I welcome you to check out projectforwardtoo.com to read up on the ideas. While the survey is closed, you can still email or call us with your feedback. We look forward to hearing from you on what you think about these ideas and how you believe we can make our government more user-friendly and also save the taxpayers some money in the process. Finally, we want to remind everyone here and watching live that at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, February 20th, Indian Point will be conducting a full volume test of their sirens. If you aren't expecting that sound, it can be quite jarring to say the least. So please mark it down on your calendar so you're not surprised. And it is just a test. Okay, so with that, do we have any liaison reports? None. We have no departmental reports this evening. And I welcome public comment on any of the agenda items on our special meeting, of which we only have 2, basically, right? So if anybody has any public comments on the 2 items on our special meeting, now would be the time to make those. Okay, hearing none, we're going to move into our board resolutions.
Resolution A, Finance Capital Project 2018-5218, Ryder Park Caretakers Cottage Rehabilitation, Town Parks. Resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Ossining authorizes opening a 2018 capital project 2018-5218 entitled Ryder Park Caretakers Cottage Rehabilitation for the Town Parks Department with a project budget of $40,000. The project will be funded from a transfer from general fund balance.
Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
So a project that has been in the town's capital plan starting in 2018 is the work on the Caretaker's Cottage at Ryder Park. As we have already expended some funds on asbestos remediation and some hardware, we are backdating this capital project to 2018 and will be reclassing the bills we have paid thus far. The reason for doing this is being able to capture the full cost of the project in one place without having spikes in our operating budget. The same is true of the next resolution, which is a vehicle purchase. Thanks to our parks crew for working so hard on this project, which will help the town to be more energy efficient in both the short and the long term. Any questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Resolution B, Finance Capital Project 2019-5219, 2019 Chrysler Pacifica Van, Town Nutrition. Resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Ossining authorizes opening a 2019 capital project 2019-5219 entitled 2019 Chrysler Pacifica Van for the Town Nutrition Department with a project budget of $38,400. The project will be funded from a transfer from general fund balance.
Do I have a motion?
Move.
Second.
Is there any, do you want to say anything about this, man? No.
Sure. There are a couple vehicles in the senior nutrition program that we have slated for replacement. Unfortunately, this is one that got into a very bad car accident and was totaled. Thankfully, nobody was injured, but it's not a vehicle that we're going to be able to keep. So we're going to be replacing it.
A few minor injuries, but everybody was okay. So, and it was not our fault.
Our car was stationary.
Yes, our car was doing what it was supposed to be doing. In any case, so this is actually a plug-in hybrid van, and we're hoping to continue in that direction to get more energy efficient vehicles added to our town fleet. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay. Correspondence to be received and filed. Resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Ossining hereby accepts the following Zoning Board of Appeals resolution dated December 17th, 2018.
Do I have a motion?
Move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we have no monthly reports. Is there, we have visitor recognition on any item? Anybody wants to make any comments?
Hello, good evening, town board, town supervisor Levenberg, and rest of the town board. My name is Matthew Galata, president and founder of Galata House. I just want to say, just to reiterate, how much I was very happy And my board was very happy that you guys made the decision to allow us to have the second annual Polar Plunge Safe from Sing Sing at the Lewis Engel Waterfront Park. It was a huge success. So far, as of right now, is $11,310. One of the bigger items was a $2,800 disbursement to a family in Westchester suffering from cancer, so they had a lot of medical bills, and that was dispersed. And the second largest amount, with the additional 500 that Town Supervisor Lundberg just handed to Town Councilman DeTore, Karen DeTore, is brings a total of $1,710 for the traveling homeless shelter. So we're very happy to do that. Yeah, I had the experience to actually serve the food, and I wish everybody could do that. And if you have the opportunity to do that with your children, it's definitely awesome. So I just wanted to say thank you again. I want to specifically just say thank you to the sponsors: Pure Cancer Foundation, Ray Insurance, Janet Brand, Dave's Fences, Austin Police Athletic League, Kelly Gannon, Living Solar, UPS Store, Johnny G, who actually played some awesome motivating music, Deli Bagels and Briar Bagels, and Giovanni's Pizza, who handed out free pizza to everybody coming out of the water and anybody who was there. John Crawford Funeral Services, we didn't need his services yesterday. Audie Hawthorne, Croton Auto Park, Zuni's Landscaping, and Auto Body Repair A. Nolan's. So because without sponsors, really, things doesn't happen. And our participants was 39 participants. We had waivers for, and we're just excited. And Gareth tested the water, and it was the best rating. I'm sure it will be later on announced and what the river's doing, but I mean, this was the best testing of water in a long time at the Hudson River. So people should know that. You know, we make jokes about it. I lived in Sleepy Hollow, Tarrytown. I grew up swimming in the Hudson River. This test results were the best. And, I'm very happy that we shared this with the community. Really a large turnout, and it was a great community effort. And I was going to wait till tomorrow, but I don't want to wait. So last year, Town Supervisor Levenberg raised the most, $2,500. And this year, she decided to team up with Tasty Table, and they have raised over $3,310. So thank you very much, Tasty Table and Town Supervisor Levenberg. But I just wanted to share also, we're very busy here at Galata House, and tomorrow we're doing our annual Galata House Presents Family Fun Night with the Westchester Knicks, and we have 140 families coming tomorrow. We have a grudge match at halftime at 7 p.m. The game starts, so about 8:15. We have St. Anne's 8th grade CYO boys versus the St. Augustine's 8th grade CYO Blue Boys. So that should be a very exciting event. And again, all the children are free from birth to 18, and all the food is provided for free. And if they need transportation, that is also provided for free. So we're very excited to do this tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we're going to be in Terrytown. But I mentioned Terrytown because it's also open to the surrounding areas. We do have some Austin residents come. We do a free third Thursday food dinner, and we feed between 45 and 60 families that are in need that would like a nice hot meal. So that's open to all residents. It's at the CY Community Opportunity Center in Terrytown. I used all my time. I want to say thank you very, very much again, and have a good and have a safe night tomorrow.
Thanks so much. And I just wanted to mention that I think the best song that John Girolamo played was You're as Cold as Ice, and we were. That was the first song. And
He is good at being
that was
appropriate with his
very appropriate.
Thank you, Town
Thanks
Board.
so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Okay. Hearing no more, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting to our work session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So next up, we have our friends from the Benjamin Center at SUNY New Paltz, Gerald Benjamin, Professor Dr. Gerald Benjamin, Professor, I don't know, got a lot of accolades attached to his name. I'm not sure I have them all. And Thomas Citrino, who were instrumental in putting together the study of the impacts of the adoption of the homestead, non-homestead property tax system in Ossining. As many of you are aware, the town undertook a townwide revaluation, I think starting in 2014 it started, I think, and then it was completed and affected the first town roll was in 2016. At that time, the town had an opportunity to adopt a different type of classification for properties called homestead, non-homestead tax system. And at the time, based on the research that had preceded our consideration of that, the town board at the time chose not to adopt homestead. We continue to get feedback following that decision from many folks from both the condominium community as well as the single family homeowners. And it was brought to our attention that the study that we were relying upon focused more on the mid Hudson or the region of the state and not as much the downstate area where we are. And the suggestion was made that we take a look, and the board decided to take a closer look at the impacts affecting the areas such as Westchester, Rockland, Putnam, Nassau counties. So with that, we went out to RFP to see if we could find some institutions that might be interested in working with us on this study that would be more closely looking at what the impacts might be for Ossining. And the winners of that request for proposals was the Benjamin Center. And here you are now, a few months later, and no worse for the wear, hopefully. And we're looking forward to hearing the results. We did publish the study on our website, and we blasted it out, I think, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, approximately. We were expecting to have this meeting last week, but because of the weather, we didn't. And so we were grateful that you were able to make it here this week, and that the snow is coming tomorrow this week and not today. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here. And without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, members of the board, for the opportunity to prepare this report. We think that this is a matter of great importance in New York State, and certainly it's a matter of importance in Ossining. And we appreciate having been retained to do this. Tom Citrino, my colleague, and I are going to make this presentation together. I'm going to speak initially about some of the context and issues. Tom will follow, and then I'll conclude. So we'll speak sequentially. I would welcome questions from the board as we proceed. There's no need to, something occurs to you that you want to ask about, just ask it. I've been teaching for 51 years and can't be thrown off course by question.
Let me just double check it. Everybody in the back here. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Is
Fantastic.
the equipment on?
Fantastic.
So the issue, we're going to start with a summary of the issue. The issue is that there is a different effective tax rate for single-family homes and condominiums in Ossining because of the way condominiums are valued under state law. These are not equivalently valued properties. These are properties that are the average property for the class in the jurisdiction described. Property tax in Ossining Town, Village, and School District combined. And you can see that there's a net tax difference of $6,624 for condominiums and a percentage difference of 45%. The condominiums are less heavily taxed, and this obviously raises a tax equity issue in the community. We summarize here the arguments pro and con of adopting homestead, non-homestead. H/NH is the shorthand we're using for homestead, non-homestead for the purpose of this presentation. People who want to adopt homestead, non-homestead argue that there's a fundamental equity issue, that the ad valorem principle means that property should be taxed on the basis of value. That's what the translation is of that Latin term. That a phase-in is possible of any change, that the system under its current design can be gamed to advantage people who can establish the legal status of being in a condominium, and that there's the negative impact of change, which is and based on previous studies is in fact exaggerated when it comes to this community. People who want no change also have an equity argument. They think it's unfair to cause a massive change in their tax liability by adopting homestead, non-homestead. They say they use limited services. They say this would not be an affordable change for them and perhaps require many of them to leave the community. They suggest that their value of their property would be diminished, and that there's an unpredictable tax level and volatility for business, and that the change is irreversible. That is, if the community decides that it made a mistake, it as a practical matter could not alter its path. So we're going to examine these arguments in the course of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll have addressed all the arguments. The next several slides talks about how we got here, what the history of the law is for taxation of condos and homes in New York State. The tax rate was created for condos in 1964 by the legislature to encourage condo conversions while protecting the tax base. And this was done principally with a focus on New York City. There were some other jurisdictions affected, but the principal focus was on New York City. 1975, the Court of Appeals mandated assessment at 100% of value. Our report, by the way, is much more detailed than this, and we were tasked with creating an understandable summary, which we've attempted to do. So the detail in the report gives the citations to the court decisions, for example, and some greater detail of the reasoning in that litigation, but we don't have it in the slide presentation. In 81, the legislature wanted to undo the Court of Appeals decision, and the reason was that the Court of Appeals decision would effectively shift tax liabilities across the state very substantially onto homeowners. The legislature didn't want that to happen. So legislature made full value assessment a local option and created homestead, non-homestead as an incentive to take up this local option. So they didn't abandon a valuation at 100%, but they didn't require it, and they incentivized it, but didn't require it. 81, Governor Carey vetoed the law. Some of you are not, this is dangerous for me, but vetoes are had rarely been overridden in New York history. So Governor Carey veto, the override by the legislature of this veto was quite an unusual step. The governor said this bill ignores one of the most glaring inequities in our current system, namely the significant preferential valuation treatment accorded to condominiums. So he was on point and on issue with regard to the advantage of condominiums and vetoed the legislation. The legislature overrode the veto. Therefore, the homestead, non-homestead option was not designed to achieve equity between homeowners and condominium owners. It was designed for a different purpose. Tax advantage earlier provided to condominium owners was consciously left in place when state property tax policy was redesigned in 1981. There was a chance to undo this, and it was not taken. But we need to understand the purpose of the homestead, non-homestead option. No municipality in New York State has adopted homestead, non-homestead a year or more after its initial adoption of full value assessment. So it hasn't been used for the purpose that has been sought, all that's been sought here. Now I'm going to turn this over to Tom. We prepared the research collectively, so we're going to deliver it collectively.
Barry feels that I should do some speaking.
Microphone.
So, right.
Is that the microphone?
I think, can everybody hear me? Yes. Yeah, my voice doesn't often a microphone. So I'm going to explain how, in a very simple manner, how homestead, non-homestead. First off, property is divided into two classes. One are homes, which includes condos, and one is commercial property. Each class assigned a portion of the tax liability based on historic experience. So what the legislature did, if you move to full value, back in 1981, typically commercial properties were overassessed, homes and residents were underassessed. If you go to full value, what would happen is there'd be a huge tax shift from the commercial tax base to the homeowner tax base. Well, legislators are homeowners, number one. Number two, there are a lot more homeowners than there are commercial properties. They didn't want this shift to occur. So they created a system where if you went to full value, you did not have to endure this massive shift to the homestead class. Because what they basically said was, whatever share of the pie that commercial properties paid prior to full value would be the share of the pie when we go to full value. But what that creates is two different tax rates. One for homes, which includes condos, and one for commercial properties. Typically, in the around 30 communities that have adopted homestead, typically the commercial property tax rate is significantly higher than the tax rate for residents. And if you think about it, that's the point, right? That's how you maintain the shares of the pie. Now, in doing this, the legislature also said, if you're going to adopt homestead, you are able to assess them in the same way that single-family homes are assessed. In essence, if you adopt homestead, condos will no longer have the tax break that the legislature gave them in 1964, where they don't assess them on market value. On the other hand, if you don't adopt homestead, condos are assessed in a way that puts them below market value. So homestead allows the community to assess condos at market value, and in essence takes the tax break away from them. Now, when I looked at the bill jacket, and a bill jacket is when a piece of legislation is passed by a legislature, the governor invites comments from all interested parties. Typically, researchers find the bill jacket as the best evidence of what intent was. Courts tend to look at that. So I looked at the bill jacket for when this was enacted. Now, one of the inputs from all the different groups mentioned anything about the condo tax break being taken away. And why is that? Because I think the legislature was sort of doing a wink and a nod here, where they basically said, hey, you tell them you're going to full value, you're going to full value, not realizing that you might be taking a tax away. In my opinion, and this is an opinion, for instance, we looked at all the different towns that adopted homestead. Parkston was one of the towns that adopted it back in the 80s. There was no discussion in any of the newspapers about losing the condo tax break. Why is that? Because I don't think people realize, because I think they just thought they were going to full market. The other important point is each jurisdiction has the ability to adopt homestead or not. So if the town adopts homestead, that only applies to the town portion of your taxes. So if you live in the village doesn't adopt homestead, your town taxes would be done on a homestead, non-homestead basis, but not your village taxes. The same thing relates to the school district. Each level of government would have to adopt homestead and non-homestead on its own. Now, we talked to representatives of the village, school districts involved. None of them showed any interest in adopting the homestead tax system.
The supplementary point that's very important is this would burden the assessor. Because the assessor would have to maintain separate roles for the assessor assesses for all the jurisdictions that are named, the villages, the school districts, and insofar as they're inside the town, the assessor would have to, if only there was only not adoption by all the affected jurisdictions, the assessor would have to have separate roles for those adopting jurisdictions and those that were not adopting.
So
There's a-
every
there's a
property
question.
would have two different best
There's a
values.
question.
You can keep the mic.
Good
Go ahead,
questions.
So if the assessor has to maintain separate roles for school districts and
values,
for
right. Values.
separate values, and then assuming further down the road, the commercial and the residential start to separate, and we want to take a piece of legislation to bring it back, would that then be three separate?
Well,
Remember, you know what I mean?
Oh,
You know what I mean?
I think,
Where we
take
can,
it back, the town, each jurisdiction would have to vote to rescind it.
right, not
to
rescind.
adjust.
No, to adjust the rates. But you can only do that if they're within the whole, or am I ahead of you?
No, that's okay. The adjustment of rates is allowed within the law. But as you'll see, once you adopt it, in this case, see the rates for homestead and non-homestead are hardly different. They're
Right.
very similar, much different than any other place. And that's because you've already gone to full value. So
Right.
the shares
They're
of the
not
pie.
expected to diverge later?
Well, you're a little ahead of us.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But let me,
All right,
let me
I'll
say
wait.
that, talking about this today, the potential for if there's a traumatic event, like power plant closing, which would be an example that occurred in some other towns, that would take a massive amount of commercial property off the rolls all at once. And that would have a major consequence if you were on homestead, non-homestead for the non-homestead base, which would then have to generate the same portion of the revenues, but on a much smaller base, so there'd be much higher rates. But we didn't provide in our analysis for the effect of a traumatic event, but we know of examples.
Just
So to-
also, can I just, I'm sorry, just one more clarification. The question of all of the municipal jurisdictions, some might adopt or some, but the town would have to make the decision first to
Yes.
allow these other
That's
jurisdictions.
correct.
Okay.
That is absolutely correct. A jurisdiction within the town can adopt homestead, non-homestead unless the town has it.
Okay.
And so what Jerry was saying, make sure everybody understands, if you lose a big piece of commercial property, the commercial share of the pie remains the same. So the rest of the commercial properties have to make up that tax difference, that loss.
So under no, homestead freezes the percentages, so under no circumstances it can be adjusted?
You can adjust it within 5% under the law. Sometimes you can get the legislature to change the shares by 1%, which they do in order to keep homeowners' taxes down. They never adjust the share to keep commercial taxes down.
Getting into a level of complexity
Yes.
that's just going
Sorry.
to confuse the discussion.
Okay.
The fundamental point is that if you have in Ossining, if you adopt homestead, non-homestead, because you already went to 100% valuation, the rates for homestead, non-homestead are not largely different. And that's distinct from most experience, as we'll show later in the presentation.
Thank you.
That's distinct from most experience. We can think of circumstances in which the base of the non-homestead base was compromised by some event, which, a certiorari decision of some kind, or closing of a major commercial property, or whatever, that would have a major impact on the tax rates of commercial properties. We didn't calculate that for the purposes of this presentation.
Thank you.
Okay,
But it is a possibility.
right? We want to stay focused on the main points, because we can go into Never Never Land, and they'll all be true, but at the end of the day, we'll all have a headache.
Okay.
Not really get
Not,
better
not
understanding.
advance the understanding.
Right.
I don't want to lead anybody. We're happy to answer questions, but we want to stay focused.
Okay.
Okay, so if you look at the average town tax burden impact of Ossining had homestead, non-homestead in 2008, and we rely on, we were grateful for help from the assessor's office and from the state regional office in getting these numbers together. For a single-family home, the single-family home taxes would go down the town tax, notice we're not discussing the school district tax, we're not discussing the village taxes. Town tax would go down $32 for a single family home, or 13%. Homestead and non-homestead had been in place in Ossining in 2018. Condo taxes would be up an average of $664 or 58%. Commercial taxes would be down $332 or 2%, which illustrates the point that we were making about the impact being less substantial than in other places that we've studied.
And that
Yeah.
underscores the point. Town taxes make up a very small percentage of the total property taxes.
Right. Percentage change is very high for condominiums. The percentage change is more modest for single-family homes. There's significant numbers for people trying to support a family. Next slide, please. Now, the average overall tax burden impact on condos of adoption of homestead, non-homestead in 2018. This is the average overall tax burden. Now, the assumption is that everybody adopts homestead, non-homestead, the towns, school district, town, the school districts, and the villages. Town, the unincorporated portion of town, the percentage increase condos is, dollar increase for condos exceeds $5,000, and the percentage increase is 65%. Village of Ossining, the increase is about $4,500 or 55% for condos, and Village of Briarcliff, Ossining School District, $6,500, 67%, and Village of Briarcliff School District, in excess of $6,000 or 73%. In other words, these are very major tax on condo owners, projected from the date. Projected average overall tax burden impact on residences of adoption of homestead, non-homestead. The decreases. I was trying to avoid parentheses because not everybody gets it. And I was trying to avoid plus and minus signs because not everybody sees it. So I used the word increase and decrease. Blame me if it's less than fully clear. Town unincorporated decreased $1,700 or 10%. Village of Ossining decreased $1,390 or 9%. Village of Briarcliff, Ossining School District, $2,700, 9%. Village of Briarcliff School District, $1,562. So there's this, again, you can see a major increase in the condos, significant decrease in the homes that are not condos. Impact on businesses. See the percentage changes, percentage decreases for adoption of homestead, non-homestead. Minimal, still not trivial dollars. Minimal in percentage change.
And the opposite of what Homestead's supposed to do.
Opposite of the expectation.
Remember, Homestead's designed to protect, shift from commercial to homeowners. If Ossining adopted homestead, non-homestead, commercial taxes would go down.
That's the reason for that is there's a high portion of condos in the Ossining tax. Now, we were asked to look at jurisdictions similar to Ossining because our previous research on Kingston, as was suggested, was argued was not indicative of what was likely to happen in suburban communities. So we picked alternative. We had two classes we tried to locate two classes of comparisons, places that adopted homestead, non-homestead, and that did not adopt homestead, non-homestead, but were eligible to do so. Why did they not do it? Why did they do it? What happened? Those are the questions. So we had to get comparables that were reasonably defensible. See the starred items here. Few condos, those communities. So we decided those were not comparable. Scarsdale, North Salem, and Carmel were not comparable. So we picked Mamaroneck, Greenberg for comparison. These are not to say
I'm sorry,
that,
Mr. Benjamin, can you just use your microphone?
Okay, this is not to say that these are perfectly comparable communities. These are from the available alternatives. So often in communities will say, well, we're not comparable to the places you chose. We had to choose from the available alternatives that were eligible and taken the choices. And we chose Clarkstown, Haverstraw, and Southeast for those that adopted homestead, non-homestead. here are the dimensions that we made the comparisons about on. This is a percentage value that they're assessed at. Once you adopt homestead, non-homestead, you don't have to maintain 100 assessment at 100% of value. You have to have it. You have to be eligible for assessment for. It would be eligible homestead, non-homestead. You have to do the reval, but you don't have to maintain the effect of the reval over time. We looked at the percent residential of the town, the percent condo of the town, the per capita income of the town, and the median household income of the town. In other words, we're trying to find comparables on a number of housing-related and income-related variables. Leaders in Greenberg and Mamaroneck said that one key reason for their decision not to adopt was the potential tax shock for condominium owners who had assumed a certain level of taxation when they purchased their property. So they specifically took this choice to avoid tax shock for the condominium. Southeast, the homestead system is now accepted by the community and has not been an impediment to commercial development, according to the assessor. However, there was controversy when the homestead, non-homestead system was adopted, especially in the impact on school taxes. Of course, are the largest proportion of property taxes. So the impact of school taxes was significant, and there was an issue. Town and school district officials felt the protection provided to homeowners from significantly increasing taxes was due to reval outweigh the increase in taxes for condominium owners. So this is a policy judgment by the leadership of the community about what the degree of impact on the various constituencies that are interested is going to be. Now, I'm not here to instruct you about your job for making policy, so this is not a great insight. But we interviewed the leaders of those communities, and they made a judgment about the balance they wanted to find when they made the decision.
The interesting thing in Southeast, I read all the newspaper articles. Nobody realized, condo owners didn't realize they were losing their tax break till the school board, because the school went first, right? Published their tentative tax rates. And that's when the condo owners got upset, but it was already too late. The school board had already adopted it. So again, I think that points to the fact that many years ago, and many of these communities adopted homestead, non-homestead. There might not have been the greatest public outreach about what tax breaks you would have to have gone to town board meetings and paid attention, as often happens. Okay.
Haverstraw and Clarkstown. In Haverstraw and Clarkstown, homestead, non-homestead is used as having a significant effect on the local economy. And the proximity to New Jersey is an important consideration for the leaders of those communities. They feel their competitive situation relative to New Jersey for commercial and industrial property is a significant concern. Homestead, non-homestead has been adopted. Businesses are consistently taxed at higher rates, but this would not be the case in Ossining. Let's see if we can get the next slide. Maybe we have a chart.
We did the graph.
Okay.
I think, how do I go back? Right click, right? I think here that you can see that the ratio of homestead to non-homestead ranges for commercial property to 1.38, and that's meaning that if homes are 1, commercial is taxed 1.38 to 1, and it goes up to 2.38. So the tax rates are that's the ratio of the difference, and you can see that that is significantly higher than what it would be in Austin. And again, that's because you've already done your reval and your share of the pie well established.
Okay.
Else, Jerry, on this
No, I
one?
think let's move on. This is an attempt to get at the question of volatility. One thing that people have argued is bad about homestead, non-homestead is the relative volatility of on the commercial side. Movement of the tax liability up and down, mostly up, in what some people would say is an unpredictable fashion. This is especially an argument made by the business community in Rockland County. And you can see that there's some volatility, there's a significant amount of volatility in Stony Point, but in general the lines don't, and there's some volatility in Rye, but in general the lines are flat. And what that means is that the commercial ratio of commercial rate to the residential rate is not moving a lot, which argues or suggests that the volatility is not universal. In many places it's not a problem.
Not as great as it is in upstate communities that have adopted homestead, like Kingston.
So we looked at policy options. We were directed to look at policy options, and we look at local options and state policies. Happy our Assemblywoman is here because we looked at state policies. An opportunity for us to communicate directly. So I call this a Hobbesian choice, two equally undesirable options. I looked it up and my definition of Hobbesian choice was close to correct. One option, impose a massive tax increase on 1 in 6 property taxpayers in Austin.
Hold the microphone a little closer.
Okay. Impose a massive tax increase on 1 in 6 property taxpayers in Austin to achieve equity. Or accept inequity in taxation arising from state policy that negatively affects the vast majority of Austin taxpayers. Both are bad options. Ironically, adopting homestead, non-homestead would create the problem it's intended to solve, which is to create a tax shock. It's supposed to solve. Preventing condo conversion is something that Ossining has already acted to do by local law. That's an option they have. Town lacks authority to bar new condo construction. However, the policy debate has been a disincentive to building condos because there's uncertainty building condos about it doesn't mean they won't be built, but uncertainty elevates risk, and elevation of risk is a disincentive to developers. An environmental impact review process provide further disincentives to constructing condos. Well, you're asked for economic impact when you do the environmental review process, so I'm raising this question. I'm not giving an answer to the question, but I think the question is worth considering as if condos or further condominium development is proposed in the community. State legislation does not easily pass laws that increase property taxes for any homeowners. The only legislation passed in recent years addressing the homestead, non-homestead option lowers the maximum limit in the shift of class shares in specific municipalities. Mentioned this, and this goes to, not recalling your name, Ms. Feldman?
Yes.
So the shift of class shares can burden one or the other of the two pots. So if you limit the shift in shares, you limit the volatility. So certain communities have petitioned the legislature to allow them to limit the shares more than the general legislation limits it. And that has happened in a couple of places in New York. Proposed homestead reform legislation would give all local governments that adopted homestead, non-homestead the option to implement a 25% cap in the difference between the two classes tax rates over a 10-year period. That's also a control of the shift. That authorization has not been given.
The Assembly passed that bill, and it did not. And after the Senate didn't,
Next slide. 3 suggested state policy changes. Require condominiums to be assessed at market value. Well, this is what I called draconian, because this would move several $1,000s of tax liability onto the condo owners. The benefit to the homeowners, but a less large benefit, as we demonstrated. Require condominiums to be assessed at market value with a phase-in over time. Advocates for homestead, non-homestead in this community have argued for a phase-in, and they've talked about 7 years. There's no authorization in state law to a phase-in. Would mitigate the resulting tax shock, but would guarantee tax increases to those people into the middle distance, because they know that they'd have to deal with a portion of the phase-in. And a tax increase that exceeded the, obviously exceeded the increase for the rest of the community, and certainly increased that contemplated by state policy. There's a tax cap going on. Third, retain the current condominium assessment policy for current owners, or require condominiums to be taxed at market value after they are sold or otherwise transferred to new owners. So at transfer, you lose the tax. The idea is at transfer, you lose the tax benefit. So that would essentially be, think about it, or reduce the market value of condos and be a payback of the tax advantage that you appreciated in the reduced capital value of your asset. And we haven't calculated what that would be. We could try to do that, but we haven't calculated that. But does everybody see the point? You know, you keep enjoying the tax benefit, but when you sell your house, your condo, you lose the next person loses the tax benefit, so they're willing to pay you less for the condo. That's in fact community capturing back some of the tax benefit that it provides. All these options have significant impacts on condo owners. Option 2 guarantees years of tax increase above the statutory cap rate with minimal annual benefits to other taxpayers. Option 3 avoids, minimal might not be right, with modest, I think would be a better word. Option 3 avoids that immediate tax liability impact, but devalues condominiums in the real estate market. Option 3, fourth point, qualifies the third point. Option 3 is likely the least bad option for longtime condo owners, because they have benefited for a while from the tax benefits, and they don't have to pay higher taxes immediately, short term, but their capital value of their asset is diminished. And we concluded that the prudence of there's equity arguments, and we go through the equity arguments in great detail in the study. And I'll answer any questions about them here, happily answer any questions. We ultimately concluded that change at the town level is contingent on the state policy that mitigates the impact on condo owners of the all at once effect of adoption of homestead, non-homestead. And if you think about it, state policy has always tried to mitigate the effect of a negative effect of a property tax change in property tax policy on homeowners, and this would be in accord with that practice. And we've suggested some steps that the state might take. But we're not saying that it's fair. We don't think it's fair, but we think the way out is unfair, and so fairness has to be found in the way out. I think that's a proper summary of what we think. We're happy to take any questions.
Okay, so I'm just going to open it up to the board now, and I just wanted to let the public who's come this evening to take a look at our work session and hear this presentation that we are going to have a town hall meeting on March 5th so that we can hear lots of public input and feedback on the results of this study. And I'll ask my board colleagues if they have any questions. I did want to just ask one quick question, which is that how, going through this study, how do you think it differed from the Kingston study in terms of the sort of general observations and conclusions?
Well, in Kingston, there's a deep belief in the business community that the homestead, non-homestead system was damaging the economic competitiveness of Kingston. And when we talk to realtors and people in the real estate business, or I guess that would be realtors, they believe that that this negative impact was driving customers into surrounding towns who wanted to be in the region. And they also believe that there was inexorable and growth in commercial property taxation that would be going on in an unpredictable way forever. Now, when it came to looking at that study, and so we also talked about the psychological consequences of this. I guess psychological would be the wrong term, but the hard to measure consequence of this, attitudes of people about the real estate market and investing in Kingston and developing the community. Now, it was argued in Ossining that our study was not useful in looking at the circumstance of Ossining because small cities like Kingston that lost their economic base, Kingston lost its manufacturing base a while ago and then lost its IBM, massive IBM plant in '93. And so they said that this was a non-parallel circumstance. So we were arguing from an analogy, a false analogy. And I think there was fairness in that criticism. And they also argued that Kingston was having a renaissance. And so I looked into the renaissance argument with friends in the real estate industry. I lived in New Paltz for 50 years, and I was an elected leader in New Paltz in Ulster County for 12 years. So I have some relationships in Kingston. And as I think I told the town supervisor, there's a lot of thinking about the relative fragility of Kingston's recent successes. They're undeniable, and they're largely attributed to migration up from downstate New York by some by real estate speculators and some by people who are moving, who find the Kingston market very attractive because they're comparing it to the New York City market. So I'm not going to say that Kingston's not doing well, but I'm saying that maybe its strength of its real estate market is overestimated from an external view.
I just want to open it up to the board. Any questions? And I have others. You have anybody? No? Okay. I'll read my own questions. I have a couple. Okay. So one of my questions is that I guess for communities who adopted Homestead, how did condominium sales compare to sales of PUDs with the same value or equal attributes immediately following their adoption of Homestead and also some years out? Did they catch up?
After we finished the study, I actually looked at that question by looking at equalized total assessed value of residents, condos, commercial properties, 2008 to 2017. In Ossining, single tax, Greenberg, Mamaroneck, and three comparables, Haverstraw, Clarkstown, and Southeast. And all I can say is, and I've asked for more peer review, the data is all over, and you can't really make on it. In some communities, condos went down greater than residents. In other communities, it was the opposite, both homestead and non-homestead, which I think one of the big conclusions we made when we looked in Kingston was that there are many factors that affect the value of homes and commercial properties. Taxes is one of them, but there are many other factors. And in Kingston in particular, we saw crime and quality of schools had as much or greater impact. So inconclusive, based on the data that I've looked at. I've just recently shared it with the assessor. We'd like Office of Real Property Tax to look at it. But based on what Jerry and I can see, when we plotted that out, equalized total assessed values, classes of properties, homestead, not homestead communities in Rockland and Westchester and one in Putnam, it was all over the place. And certainly no statistically significant conclusion could be made.
I mean, I guess, to one of your points, which is that if the recommendation was to seek legislation that would, upon sale, the condos would convert to full value taxation, then it would, and you had sort of concluded, but that's going to devalue the sale price of the condominium because the taxes, are going to go up on that property. But we've heard from our local real estate community that that's not really the case because, across the street from a condominium is a PUD or a, homeowner association that's not a condominium, that's a property that looks and acts in every other way the same as a condominium, paying full taxes with the same value, and they're able to get command the same sale price with or without that tax break. So I think that is significant to sort of have a better understanding of if there does.
Thing we did in the Tom talking. We'd have to look at the actual data. One thing we did was estimate what a family could afford in the report. And we showed that as the taxes went up, and this was a point made by developers that we tested with some models that we found help us calculate this. Found that a family that could afford $4,500 a month could afford to have a mortgage, a 5% mortgage or a 4% mortgage that would have a certain specified monthly payment, and as their taxes went up, they could afford to borrow less and still survive on their budget, still meet their housing needs on their budget. So it's clear that people who have a limit on what they can spend monthly have a limit on what they can pay, linked to a couple of variables, what the mortgage rate is and how much they put down and so on. And so that means that the price they can afford to pay for the property diminishes. Now, what's actually happening in the market would require us to look at current transactions in the market beyond what we've done.
And when we looked at what I explained first, equalized total assessed values, classes of property. So now you're not cherry picking, right? You're basically looking at all condos in a community and their total equalized assessed value over time, right? And compared it to resident. Number one, from 2008 to 2017, in all these communities, except for Mamaroneck, total assessed values of both classes of properties went down over that time period. In some cases, significantly. All of them had decreases in condos, non-homestead area, but they also had decreases in residents, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller. And again, we discussed this with the assessor. He said, well, perhaps that shows the folly of having one equalization rate for 3 different types of class of property, but that's what you have to work with.
And thank you for noting that we have our assessor, Fernando Gonzalez, with us tonight. Mr. Gonzalez, did you want to have any further comment on that question of
Yes, I'd like to point out,
condominium sales?
make a few points to explain those differences. First of all, the equalization rate method completely flawed in my opinion because the analysis is based to try to paint the whole town, the whole section, whole municipality with one brush. And in real estate is local. Go to the point after the reassessment to divide our town in neighborhoods and make adjustments specific to neighborhoods for the local community like Indian Village, Rose Cliff, 2 totally different neighborhoods. So to explain the difference, you find that values, total taxable value went down, all classes of property. A lot of it is a function of the economy. Of course, after the recession, after 2008, we saw a tremendous increase in rental rates. And therefore, we are beginning to see the increased valuations on condominium properties. But before then, one of the points I made is that during that period, I've been here for about 7 years, but I would say within the last 10 years, the town of Ossining settled and lowered the value of probably most of the condominium complexes in the town. So that explains a lot of the reduction.
Which is why it's difficult to compare communities Because you have to use equalized total assessed value. You have to equalize because they're not assessed at the same rates. But when you do that, you're basically
Yeah.
losing the
Well,
unique.
I think one methodology to try to find the explanations, to rather try to observe the explanation better, is to compare towns that have done a revaluation, that the values are based on current data, not on inventory that is 80, 100 years old, that the properties have been reviewed and inspected, but to base a lot of this total taxable assessed value in New York State is based on rather old and incomplete data.
Right, and in the homestead communities, the only one that is currently at 100% Southeast. Everybody else at less than. So forcing you want to compare it to equalize.
To equalize, yes.
Okay. I do have a couple other. Hold on, let me just grab them. Okay, I guess my question was, what happens to commercial sales, where rates are higher? In other words, you talked a little bit about like what happened in Kingston and Newburgh. What happens here when commercial rates are higher, in terms of commercial sales? Does it matter that the rates are a little higher for commercial
Talking
properties?
to realtors in this town, they said no. They said they didn't anticipate that happening. Of course, they haven't experienced homestead, non-homestead, but that's what when I interviewed them, that's what they said. In Kingston, the belief of the realtors was that they were less competitive with other locations outside the jurisdiction that offered equal or property of equal utility. So, for example, if a dentist wanted to open a dental office in that part of Ulster County, and she had a opportunity to rent a property inside the city or adjacent to the city in the town of Ulster, and in net terms, the costs were higher and the quality of the building was the same, she would opt for being outside the city. That's what the realtors believed they were the competitive situation.
Okay.
But the testimony of realtors in this town was they didn't anticipate that and understand that the commercial rate is different and only minimally from the residential rate in this case by our calculation.
So significantly different than other communities that adopted home. Your homestead, non-homestead rate would be very similar. That's different, much different than most of the other.
And you said in Briarcliff, it's actually residential is higher than
That's
commercial.
correct. In other words, turning it completely on its head.
Right.
Right.
And then, I mean, just to clarify, when we went to full value, didn't see the shift from commercial to residential, which was another sort of impetus for us to not consider adopting it. Again, the idea to adopt homestead was to potentially fix that shift. If you did see that big swing, you did not see that in our values. Now, you're saying, again, that we, not seeing that shift now, that there's no real, burden that now shifts to commercial either. But one of the other things that I would say collectively as a board feared was that over time, because residential values tend to go up faster than commercial values typically, there was the potential to have a negative impact on our downtowns or business districts. And you mentioned briefly the possibility of, if a large commercial property were to close. We have a few of those in the town, and I'm just, wondering if a large commercial property did say, sorry, can't be here anymore for whatever reason, we're selling our property. How would that impact?
There'd be a if you were on homestead, non-homestead, it'd be a consequential change increase for the commercial base, the remaining commercial base. if you think about it, if you had 10% of your property commercial, paying 25% of your, producing 25% of your your revenues, and now you lost a big property, so now only 7% of your property was commercial, it would still have to produce 25% of your revenues. And would have to do that in the year that the other property was off the rolls or diminished in value. Presumably, the large property that became vacant would be, might be devalued or might be maintained on the rolls for a while and then devalued when its valuation was proved to be ambitious given the market. But at some point, there'd be a consequence for all the other commercial properties. Could be quick, or it could be over time. But the point is that the commercial properties have to maintain that portion of the revenue base. And if they grow, usually the model that you use is they grow more slowly in value. But if they diminish in value, it's even more consequential. So, for example, in my neck of the woods in Marlboro, there was a Dan Scammer power plant that was decommissioned. And that had a traumatic effect on the tax base and raised everybody's taxes. It wasn't a homestead, non-homestead community, but if it were, the non-homestead portion of the base would be diminished by half or more and would still have to maintain that portion of the revenues. And those commercial properties would receive a very rude awakening on tax day.
There's nothing that can be done to mitigate that? You've enacted homestead?
There's a limit in how much you can shift class shares. The limit under the law is 5%, but that's 5% shifting each year. So if the homestead share, they can't make up that revenue. You can't shift it all at once, but you have to shift it 5% each time until you can get.
But the school district wouldn't be able to because they're in several municipalities.
Well,
Was
the
my
school
understanding.
Not homestead, non-homestead.
they would.
If it's specified, I'm not gonna give you the
All right.
specified percentage. If a specified portion of the school district was in Ossining, they could adopt homestead, non-homestead. And they would be affected as well by the diminished portion, the commercial portion of the base.
But I think she's asking if they didn't, there's one tax rate. So
No.
now everybody.
No.
She wasn't saying that.
Oh, okay.
She was asking if you can adjust the rates
Like,
for the
it-
school district, even if the school district overlaps municipalities. Is that right?
Right.
The
And
school
the-
district doesn't, Fernando, the school district doesn't partially adopt homestead, non-homestead based upon it being in different communities, does it? It has to fully adopt homestead, non-homestead.
The school district would have to my understanding, would have to fully adopt homestead. And then it would still impact the school district the same way, except that impact will remain within the Ossining portion of for
No.
example, the Ossining School District, 85% is in the town of Ossining. The other 15%, the other two towns. So that issue with losing a large taxpayer would be dealt with within the Ossining taxpayers. However, when you do the apportionment, of course, the total apportionment for the town of Ossining, of course, the total would be less because of losing that big taxpayer. So in effect, losing a big taxpayer like that with a school district that has to apportion with two other towns will impact those other taxpayers, those other towns.
Right.
Or
Is that
My
towns.
different-
question
is that
goes a
different?
step further than
Yeah.
that to,
Right.
let's say the school district wanted to go ask for that adjustment of 5%. Can they do that because we were told they couldn't do it because they,
Oh, you're
Across
talking about
several
split
municipalities.
districts. I get it now.
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying.
that's my
If
question.
you're a split district,
Right.
section of the law that allows you to adjust homestead, non-homestead
Right.
is different than the section of law that applies to non-split districts or towns or
Okay.
villages. However, the overall law always limits shifting class shares to no more than 5%.
Okay. So there
All
could
right.
be a remedy somewhere in the,
That issue came up and you were contemplating when you first did that. It was a large difference between homestead and non-homestead. Was there a way to make it closer?
Right.
There is, but not as well in split school districts, not.
Right.
But that isn't the case here because the tax rates are virtually the same.
Right. But if we were to lose a big property, then it would
Well,
be a
but,
challenge.
but then your class sizes are already determined. You follow what I mean?
Right. So we can't adjust the class sizes.
No. Once the class size is, once you say commercial is gonna pay 40% of the bill
Right.
and homes are gonna pay 60 or whatever, that's your share of the pie and they still have to do it.
Regardless of how much the
That's
commercial
correct.
and rate.
And
Okay.
they were, when we were discussing that issue was before the initial rate, trying to adjust it to make them closer. But there's no need to do
Right.
that because if you adopted it right now in 18, your rates would be virtually the same. The commercial rates and the
but-
homestead rates are the
Right.
same.
But Tom, I think the question is, okay, again, over time, and one of the things that we talked about was if right now it had no impact on the different portions of the pie, for example. Basically, the portions of the pie would stay essentially the same what they are right now. But if that were to change, and now the portion of the, not the portion of the pie doesn't change, but you want to change it because now you've lost this large commercial property and you want to now shift some of it back to residential, for example. Now, are you allowed to do that even if you have school districts that are split into, different municipalities?
Town is allowed to do it. I don't know the answer for the split school district. I'm not sure. But the point is that you're limited by that 5% anyways, no matter what. You can't shift class years greater than 5% in
Right.
any one year.
Okay.
So the things that we were talking about are much less than that. You follow what I mean?
Mhm.
So I think, not positive, that the adjustments under the section of law that I forget about now that are different from split school districts in town doesn't really matter when it relates to that because you're governed by that 5% thing, and that's probably what you would use in any
The
case.
important thing to remember is that you're making a decision to divide the tax base into two classes. And that decision is a governing decision. You can make incremental adjustments to that. But if your assumptions when you make that decision no longer are valid, well, we thought we had all these supermarkets and malls, but the malls closed because of internet sales, and we don't have all these malls anymore, and they're empty, and they have to be devalued in the market. They're devalued in the market. Those assumptions don't change the shares that you chose. You can make incremental adjustments to those shares. Whatever the conditions are, there are differences in the law about the degree, but you can't make massive changes. You've made that choice. That choice is one that drives your following choices.
And you said Stony Point, I think in the study you said Stony Point regretted the decision to go there and then they wanted to turn around. Why?
Because they were arguing this, the assessor there argued that it diminished the competitiveness of their commercial properties, and he saw an emptying out of the commercial tax base in the community. I think I interviewed him and I recall him saying it was called it crack for homeowners.
But he knew that they
Arizona.
couldn't change it because to do so, to get rid of Homestead, to go back to a single rate, which you would have the right to do. You can always vote to get rid of Homestead, all right? But when you do that, there's going to be a huge shift in, now you'll have all homeowners upset with you, not just condo owners,
Mhm.
because you're going to be coming from a dual rate to a single rate, which will definitely increase homeowners' taxes, which is why once you adopt Homestead, non-Homestead, only 2 communities have ever gotten rid of it. I think crack for homeowners is
But
an interesting analogy.
I think that every community is I think the analogies have value, right? And I certainly think that what we found out has value, not without pride or prejudice, but I think that each community has a degree of uniqueness. And I think the proportion of condo owners in this community is quite high relative to the communities we looked at in southern New York. And I think that the effect on the commercial tax rate is unexpectedly minimal. So in a way, there are differences place to place, and we can look at the analogies and argue about their relevance to Ossining. But we can't say we don't have predictive capacity to say here's exactly what's going to happen. We can identify the range of likely things that'll happen. We can't predict what will happen.
Got it. So I guess my last question is, if we could solve the problem easily, how would we do that? What would the solution to the problem actually be?
Well, right now, given what I know today, if the Assemblywoman could pass a bill that allowed the loss of the removal of the tax benefit at transfer of the property, I would favor that as a policy option. That would be my preferred, because, and my argument would be that the people who reside, my personal argument now, we're not talking about Tom agreeing with me or not, or there being a consensus. My personal argument on that would be people bought in good faith and made assumptions about their cost of living, and the community welcomed them. You know, the community allowed condos to be built, maybe less mindful about what the implications were, but allowed it, and they lived here for a long time. They became neighbors, and they had a certain set of costs. So they're neighbors, they made assumptions, they lived there, and they benefited. And they benefited for a period of time, however long that time was. Some people for a significant amount of time since these laws have been in place. So in effect, by recapturing some of the benefit when they sell their property, they're at that juncture where they've decided they don't want to live in Ossining or live in that property in Ossining, it seems to me equitable that the diminished capital value of their property covers some of the benefit they had over that period. So that would be my, right now, Tom, as you may or may not know, is a very imaginative policy mind and might tomorrow call me up and think of something else. But right now, given the options that I know about, that would be the one I would prefer. So I want to make this clear. Both sides have good arguments about fairness, but I just have a hard time, if I were in your shoes, Jerry Benjamin, and I've been in the role in some other place, in another place, telling 19 or 20% of my homeowners that they had to take a hit of that all at once of that nature. That would be very hard for me to read, even though their benefit is unfair. I believe their benefit is unfair.
But it's important to understand the legislature gave that benefit for a reason. They wanted to increase affordable housing. Okay, that was their, read the bill jacket, that was their reason. All right, without diminishing the property tax base of community. So they gave it for a reason. And when given the chance to take it away, not only did they refuse to do so, they overrode a governor's veto in order to keep it that way, because they believed that was an important public policy. And nothing that I'm aware of indicates to me that they want to take that tax break away. And I think it's also important to understand the history of homestead, non-homestead. The legislature has never passed legislation that would, as relates to that, that would increase taxes on homeowners, even on an incremental basis. So I would think to take all the Assemblywoman's legislative skill to convince her colleagues to vote for a bill like that, because I'm running a campaign against them. I'm saying you increase property taxes on condo owners by 51%, and I'm sure you've seen campaigns run of that sort. So the legislature doesn't like to increase taxes on homeowners.
My point is this: the option that I talked about doesn't increase anybody's taxes. The option I'm talking about, I'm not arguing in favor of it. I'm arguing among a range of bad choices, but I guess I'm in favor of it as the available option. The option I'm talking about says, look, over all this time, you had all these neighbors that were paying more taxes than you were. And the local government was forbearant based upon their belief that you had made a commitment was made, and you made some assumptions about affordability and where you wanted to live. And over all this time, relative to other people, you benefited. Now you're selling the property. You decided to realize the appreciated value of this property that you had over all this time. Well, you have to, in consideration of your advantage over all this period, you have to forego some of the benefit of the sale. So we're not increasing your property tax. We're asking you to compensate to find some way to we're finding some way to reach equity in this particular property. Now there'd be all kinds of implementation issues and all kinds of drafting issues. I mean, what constitutes a sale? If I sell my house to my daughter for $1, is that a sale? You know, but the legislature's skilled at dealing with that, and has people who are skilled at dealing with that. But that's another attractiveness of the option that I'm saying might be the best of bad options, that it doesn't raise anybody's taxes.
Well, it raises the
The next home, but they're going in eyes open. They're buying the house knowing what the taxes are.
And just again, to talk a little bit about the history of what happened in Austin, when we went to full value and we saw a shift to some property owners whose values were greatly reduced, and they had a major shift. For many years, again, they were the equalization rate. They weren't at full value. We reached out to the legislature and thankfully got something passed that allowed us to phase in those increases over, really 3 years, but really effectively 2 years before they got up to full value, to give them a chance to make a decision. Is it affordable with this now real, true tax burden that, again, should have been attached to the properties? I think that's a little different than with the condos, because, again, the condos, you could say, again, eyes wide open. They knew that, at some point in the future, homestead could be adopted and therefore they could be at full value. But without that, condos, again, thought that they had a different set of circumstances that they bought into. Whereas, single family homeowners knew that they were undervalued. If they ever looked at, Zillow or anything else, they knew what they could get probably for the sale of their property, and they were paying less. Now they're paying full value, and we said, okay, we're going to phase that in. What if you made the argument to that, which I think, again, that our real estate friends had suggested, that you phase in over a long period of time something for the condominiums. What, again, you talked a little bit about that, but maybe you just, again, talk about how you see that impact.
That would be my second of 3 choices. I could see it's still, it has the political judgment. It has the disadvantage of being property tax increase, and property tax increase for a significant portion of the community. I think we had 19% owning condos. So I could see the phase-in being another strategy for a state law, and the argument being we're going to simply move to equity. We need to move to equity. Equity. Property tax is supposed to be tax based on value. It's a wealth tax. It's a tax based on value. Insofar as it's not based on value, it has, to the degree it's not based on value, it has built-in inequity. So there's an equity argument for moving everybody all at once to the same standard, but it's not, pragmatically, it's not possible. So phase-in is an attempt to make it pragmatic, and that's to me a second best choice, because it still involves annual property tax increases of significant size for the period of the phase-in, in addition to other increases that would be enacted by the government as it might be enacted by the government as made a determination of its resource requirement. So I don't prefer that alternative, but it's another approach. I also very strongly favor state policy that makes policy for the whole state. And the state has been predisposed to being responsive to particular communities that have particular concerns, without considering the whole state the circumstance across the state, like the gaming of condominium development in Western New York is now becoming a big issue. creating condos that are kind of legal fictions to get tax advantages, which has been the subject of an expose that we talk about in our report. So I think state policy should address the state question. Now, I told you, and I say in the report that, in conversation I told you, and I say in the report, that there's a big challenge to the property tax system in New York City underway. And this could be, and we could end up in upstate New York, Ossining and other places in upstate New York. We could end up the tail that if the dog starts wagging his tail, we could be the tail, and opportunities for change could occur. But that's very contingent on what happens in litigation. And the legislature, when it sees a negative, and I have high regard for the legislator who's present, and I don't mean anything personal or judgmental about her. I've known her since she was head of the League of Women Voters. Were you head of the League of Women Voters? Yeah, a long time. You had the grace to call me and ask me about one of my books, so she became my favorite legislator. So the point is that the legislature could be put into a situation where it has to act as it was in 1981. We had the legislature acting under the threat of a change in property taxation that they found unacceptable politically. So we could open a door to policy change, and there might be smarter people than me who would think of better alternatives. But we might have an opportunity that would be statewide. I went beyond answering your question because I don't despair of a circumstance rising where we could change this, but I don't see it immediately and locally focused.
Well, but you did bring up another point, which is if we were to adopt Homestead and the next couple towns around us who also have condos for sale, we're not adopting Homestead. So you still have that tax benefit in Cortland or Croton or Greenberg, right, Pleasantville, whatever. And they haven't adopted Homestead. What happens then to condo values in Ossining?
Well, the market argument would be that if it's certainly more desirable to live in Ossining than any of those other places.
Well, we know that.
How am I doing? So, as Tom pointed out, there are a lot of variables.
Mhm.
But the market answer would be that you'd make condo ownership less attractive in Ossining. You'd also make condo development less attractive in Ossining. So investing in condos would be less likely in Ossining, and investing in other kinds of housing would be preferred for people who want to invest in Ossining, I think.
One constant we did find, we looked at the number of condos built, changed from 2000, just the number, 2008 to 2017. Hardly any new condos were built in the non-homestead area once they took that tax advantage. They basically remained static. Basically have taken away the economic sense to build them. Now, some may think that's a good thing, but others will say, well, you're taking a form of affordable housing away.
Remember the market conditions after 2008 too were very bad. So there are a lot of factors.
And unfortunately, you only can go 10 years back in days.
Right.
That's all the property tax has available. So, right.
Okay.
Well, I find it interesting that we had the shift and we asked them to stretch out the impact when we went to full value, but those people weren't at full value, and current property tax law is that they should have been at full value, whereas this was originally intended as an affordable housing, and they are currently following the law. They are taxed as the law intended. So I feel like the shift would be more not the same as the shift that happened when we went to full value, because those people weren't being taxed according to the New York State tax laws as intended, whereas the condos were intended to be affordable housing, and if we change it, we would be changing the intent. They're not doing anything wrong. So
this is the unanticipated consequence of two sets of decisions made at different times to do different things, converging and having interactive effects.
right.
That's what's happening. It's a classic example of unintended consequence. But what's really interesting is that the consequence produces exactly what you set the other policy to not do, to avoid. You know, it's an enormous irony, I think. That doesn't make it easier to manage, but
If you adopt homestead, non-homestead at this point in time in this community, you're going to have a huge tax shock, which is allegedly what homestead, non-homestead is supposed to stop. That's the irony.
Some other questions? Oh. No? Like you had
well,
a
you
couple.
know, Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, and there was no applause. And Lincoln said, left Gettysburg and said, that speech was a failure. So I'm going to conclude that there are no questions because we've answered them all, not because we
I know,
were a
I know,
failure.
I know. Okay, so under normal circumstances, we don't open up the
I would rather hear it.
excuse me. We don't usually have questions from the audience, but I had invited Assemblywoman Galiff because she is the chair of the Real Property Committee, and I mean, if you come up here though, we might ask you a question too. So if you would like to ask a question as part of this, I'm not sure if you're available next time because it's not during. I think you're going to be in session on March 5th. So if you would like to ask a question, but then again, we may ask you a question too. If that's okay. Are you okay with that? Okay. Assemblywoman Galiff.
That's all I can say. As real property tax chair, we've had a lot of hearings and had a lot of input around the state as to what to do. And the closest we got to doing anything last year, as you mentioned, in the New York State Assembly, we did vote on a bill that would give an option to a community when new development comes along, new condo, nothing built right now, but when a new condo comes around, that the community can decide whether to tax it at full value or not. So that would be, but your last comment was very interesting about the fact that if one were to do that, would the condo developers just not come into that community? So that's kind of what you were saying, which interesting take.
That's what happened in the non-homestead community. When we looked at Southeast, Haverstraw, Clarkstown, once they adopted homestead, non-homestead, and there was no new making of condos. There's
Trying to remember what years were those that they did.
one, the most recent was 2008, and
That's
is
Southeast?
Haverstraw, right?
06, I think.
Yeah.
So,
And the other one, Clarkstown was in the 80s. That's a long time ago.
right.
And then
Southeast.
we have it in our thing. And in
Yeah,
Southeast.
was 1998, something like
98,
that.
96, something.
Right.
So a long time ago.
It was right. It was a long time ago. And, you know, all of this condo loss really started, as you said, in New York City, in apartments, changing from rental to condos. And it just started. And upstate, many of my colleagues upstate, they had these places called patio homes, which I think, Jerry, you referred to, but it's almost like single family homes. You can have 10 single family homes and everybody's paying full value. And then you can have 10 single family homes but are on a patio and they're considered a condominium and they pay a lower rate and they look exactly the same. And people are actually kind of playing games with this taxing policy. But so there are people upstate that are quite upset.
Which your legislation would stop going
New
forward.
ones going forward. You got to use your microphone.
The condo organization has to be approved. There's an approval process, I think, with the attorney, is it the Attorney General? So then
right.
the issue then becomes, can we find some place in law where the approval process would be, or could we make some adjustment in law where the approval process would give consideration whether the condo is somehow a scam? Now, that would require hard thinking about how to define scam from not scam. But it might be a regulatory path. And of course, that would have to be based on law, but there might be a legal change that would open a regulatory path. I haven't studied that, but
Right.
it occurred to me.
It might be something to, first. Then I had a, because we debated this whole issue. Is it fair when somebody buys a condo and they know what the rules are, they know what their taxes are pretty much going to be, and they know the value of their condo, and they're thinking, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to at least get this and hopefully some more. And so I'm trying to think if we went with your scenario with the condo owner, when they sell it, then the next person coming in is going to have their taxes go up, although we could do it in increments with the sale. But is that fair? Is it better to do like 2 rounds? This may be playing it out too many years. So you own the condo now, you sell it. The person buying it knows that they're buying it, but when they sell it, that there's going to be a new rule. They're going to get the benefit, but they know the new rule. Whereas now they don't know the new rule because they're in there. I don't know whether that is something that is humanly possible with assessors keeping track of sales and so on, or whether, does that string it out so far?
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of years.
To me, I guess I just want to make a comment on that. I think one of the significant issues that the realtors had brought to our attention is that not everybody who comes and buys a piece of property is necessarily as tied up in what they're planning to pay in taxes. Some are, but some aren't. So many people look at, they really, does it have a river view? Does it have number of bedrooms? And obviously affordability is, plays into it, but there's a whole calculation that you do. So you're calculating your mortgage and your taxes and everything else. What is your monthly payment going to be? So if you are purchasing property and it fits all the other requirements and you know what the taxes are, they may be higher than they used to be, but that's the decision that you make as a buyer if you're going to buy that property or not. Now, you could say that devalues the condominiums, but the point that they've made to us is that across the street, a very similar property is selling for the same, and it has, 3 times higher taxes. So again, I think that's where the argument is coming from, and I understand it. And so how can you say that upon sale isn't fair or isn't getting closer to fairness?
I'm trying to get somebody to buy into this, I guess, somewhere in New York State.
Well, and that's
how
my
do we
question
do
to
it?
you.
It's
That's
a
exactly my
political
question.
problem. It's an economic political
But
problem.
I have
Right?
Doing it your way, 2 ways, makes it easier for politicians, legislators to vote for it because it puts the laws so far down the road that they're.
You don't know who it is,
That's
right?
Right,
It's like
it's the unborn who are paying for it. But let me raise another point. When I bought my house in New Paltz on Prospect Street in 1981, there were no guarantees at all about what my taxes would be in 2018. There's a weakness in the condo owner's argument that there were certain, and this is in the report, that there were certain premises that they made because there are no guarantees. The world is a cruel place, and sometimes you have to deal with unexpected changes. So just as anybody who makes an investment of any kind in a home or of any kind takes a risk, so people who buy property take a risk. So I don't resonate to the argument that there were certain conditions, you made a certain guarantee, and therefore you have to live by it because circumstances change, times change, the size of the community changes, the expectations of government change, the affordability for government changes. So that's not. I like to think that when this community, and I know it's true from people I've talked to anecdotally, when this community went to 100% valuation, a lot of people who had benefited said to themselves or to their neighbors or to their spouse over the dinner table, we benefited a long time. Now they're making this fair. It hurts, but we're going to accept it because it's really fair. And so I think that I know that's true in other places, and I know it's true here from people I've talked to here, even though not everybody had that view, but there were people who had that view. And I think that condo owners are going to have to accept some way that what's not fair can't persist. So that's my, but the problem is that there's no fair way to reach fairness.
Right. Difficult.
I have a question. So,
Can I sit down, or a question for me?
well,
It's for
it
you.
may be a question for you, but if you want to sit down, that's fine too. Because it is something that has to do with legislative action too. So, you know, this is Ossining, and all we do is talk about affordable housing all the time, 24/7. So, and we know that it's a county crisis. We know there's a state crisis. We know there's a national crisis. So, if the original idea of taxation on the condos was for affordable housing, one could argue we're at a time in history where affordable housing is maybe more relevant than it was when this was first devised. So I think some of the challenges are that maybe people didn't foresee condos taking root in such a way that you ended up with a surge in luxury condos that were upwards of $750 to $1 million and up. And now they're getting a subsidy essentially as affordable housing. So I think that a lot of homeowners feel that, well, maybe that's not such a great subsidy. But we still have this issue of affordability. So, and this is my question for you, Assemblywoman, can that be taken into consideration? Is going back to the original premise, is how can legislation preserve affordability and a different way of living that also plays to a trend of how people want to live going forward, where sprawling lawns and big houses are not as desirable anymore, and communities with smaller residences and cluster housing and all the things that condos have innately are more desirable. So again, I think there's so many factors working here that we have to look at it as just beyond what's fair, but also looking down the road of how people are going to be living in the future and what the crisis right now for affordability is. So I don't know if that's a question or a statement. I really don't.
I
I've
don't
lost
think
my.
we've really discussed that in Albany, but I'm thinking about New York City's legislation, and some the city is looking at some of these apartments, I guess, whether they're rental or condos that are very, very high end, and how to deal with that discrepancy. And you're right. I think, you know, condos were thought of originally as rental and middle class housing, and now you see gorgeous condominiums, you know, very high priced. Could you put a level? I don't know whether you could.
I could write a draft statute. Link, I could imagine writing a draft statute that would link the tax advantage from condo ownership to income or to some other measure of affordability. And then I could imagine writing a legislation that would diminish the advantage incrementally or all at once based upon distance from that measure. So that's a matter of public policy. It's a great idea. It's an idea that I never thought of. So thank you.
Thank you. You gave me. You
You're
could
welcome.
also do it based on the median value of a condo in a county, you know, and you're above that median value, you'd lose the tax break. That's another idea, a way of getting at equity and affordability. So, sort of something we didn't think of, and that's another
Wow.
way of looking at it.
Right.
And I was really struggling to keep up with the entire presentation. So
It's a little bit like our STAR program. I mean, we keep limiting the value of STAR. If you have an income, combined household income of 500,000, you know, and over, you're not getting STAR anymore. We've started to limit that, and now in this budget, 250,000 to 500,000, you're going to have to seek out a check. You'll no longer just get it on your tax bill. So I think there's a working away from having the STAR as a part of the higher income level people. So
What you're doing is you're
same thing.
making a social policy explicit in the tax break, connection with the tax break, housing policy explicit, was implicit and forgotten historically over time, but you're making it explicit and you're responding to the equity argument of the non-homeowner, non-condo owners for those condo properties that don't have the explicit value of your housing, don't respond to the explicit value of your housing policy. So it's really approaching two problems simultaneously in a different way. It's really very smart.
All right. Fernando, did you have anything you wanted to add to our discussion?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, Assemblywoman kind of asked me if it was possible to track ownership, and that's what we do. We track ownership. I'm sure it would be a simple modification to say that all the current owners are grandfather, and then upon the next transfer or the second transfer after that, I'm sure that's something that could be programmed into the existing software that we use, that we will be using it.
All right. And anything else from our esteemed study victims? We very much appreciate.
We're very appreciative of actually.
Yeah.
We're happy to have the chance to do it. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, and we look forward to thank you to the community who came out this evening. This will be available on YouTube, our town YouTube channel, at the townofossining.com website sometime tomorrow, probably in the afternoon, and we're hoping that people do have a chance to watch it and watch the PowerPoint presentation. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the full study is already up on our website. I think it's on the main page if you scroll down, but we can see if we can find a button to make it a little easier to find on the top of the page. So we will work on that. And we look forward to having you back on March 5th for a full-blown town hall meeting when we look to get additional community input. And we will continue to take the temperature of the community on this issue. Look for suggestions for paths forward that would work towards tax equity. And hopefully we can come up with some innovative solutions that nobody's thought of yet that will address many needs, not only here, but elsewhere as well. So again, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next week at our regular meeting, February 26th, right back here in the courthouse. And with that, actually, I'd like to take a motion to go into a very short executive session. Very short.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And thanks, everybody. Have a great night.